Hi everybody, this is Angela Page, and this is week 4 of LYR's Love Your Rebellion's Poetry for the People. This week we are going to be talking about slant rhyme, and more specifically assonance and consonants, which are two different sound devices in poetry. So just to give you a recap on what we've been doing here in Poetry for the People, we have had 3 classes so far. And what I'm doing is just giving some instruction and exercises on introductory poetic techniques that I think that pretty much anyone who's interested in writing poetry or songs can use in order to create some really interesting verses, phrasing, etc. So in week 1 we covered imagery, which is using vivid descriptions to create things that the reader can see, smell, touch, taste, and hear. So really using those 5 senses to create concrete descriptions. In week 2, we talked about simile and metaphor, and you probably know a little bit about simile and metaphor, but we talked a little bit more specifically about how you can create unique similes and metaphors in poetry and how to just create something different and unique versus the dead or more common metaphors that you might have heard. And then in week 3, we talked about juxtaposition. So simile and metaphor about comparison, juxtaposition is about contrasting. So in that week, we discussed how to take 2 things or more and put them up against each other, contrast these things in a poem to create mood and tone and to create more vivid imagery. So all of these things kind of center around the construction of images in poetry. And to give the reader a greater sense of what you're thinking or feeling without telling them. You want to show them. So you probably have heard that before, show, don't tell. So if you want to go back and watch any of those 3 courses, you can view them on loveyourrebellion.org on the Poetry for the People webpage. You can also find them on the Love Your Rebellion Facebook and the Love Your Rebellion YouTube. So weeks 1 through 3 are now up there, and this is week 4. So the last week, which is going to be this coming week, we will have a class on line breaks. So on Thursdays, I host a live version of this class via Zoom where you can join in with me and some other writers in order to get a workshop experience in addition to this instructional and exercise-based video. So I go over the same things in both the workshop version and the instructional video version, but it's just that we include a workshop on Thursdays. So this coming Thursday at 8 p.m., we'll have week 5, which is the final week's class, and that will be on line breaks. So if you'd like to participate, please join us. You can find that on the Love Your Rebellion Facebook page. So this week, like I said, this past week rather, in week 4, we covered slant rhyme, and more specifically assonance and consonants. So we're just going to do a little bit of work on what those are and how a poet might be able to use them in order to do a lot of really great things for their work. So let's dive into it. If you see me looking up, it's because I'm looking at my other monitor, and I have a PowerPoint that I will eventually share during this Zoom recording. So today we're going to talk about slant rhyme. We'll do look over an example poem, and we will also do an exercise on slant rhyme, and we will have the weekly prompt. So each week I leave you off with something you can maybe do for the rest of the week to keep you working on the concept that we discussed. So I'm going to go ahead and do my screen share. So give me a second while I do that. Okay, so now you should see me up in the corner, and you should also see the PowerPoint that I built. So slant rhyme is, like I said, based on the concepts of assonance and consonants. So rhyming in general is about creating harmony in sounds, and direct rhymes you probably are more familiar with. So a direct rhyme is something that is similar to the nth degree in terms of the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds, and isn't and probably also looks the same, like the letters in the words are similar, like did and hid. That's a direct rhyme, and the last two letters in the word are the same. So, but with a slant rhyme, it's a little bit more liberal. So with a slant rhyme, you will see that I have listed here some examples, and it's about the end of the line and the end of a word of that line ending with the same consonant sounds. So those examples I have here are garden, Eden, flatten, and done. So that may sound sort of weird that all of those are considered slant rhymes. With slant rhymes, we're talking not about the actual letters that are used inside of each word, but rather the sounds that are produced from those letters. So as you probably know, you've probably looked in an English language dictionary and seen that the phonetic spelling or the sounded out spelling of a word is not the same as the real spelling of the word. So we're talking about the sound that the word makes when we talk about slant rhymes and with assonants and consonants, not the letters that are actually being used. So garden and Eden are very similar in that the last three letters are identical. And then flatten, it goes down to the last two letters, and then done does not have the same consonant arrangement there at the end, but it still has that hard N sound, done, flatten, and can still be considered a slant rhyme because of that hard N there at the end. So this is, again, all about the sound the word makes. And slant rhyme, the more traditional meaning, it would have to be the last consonant sound in the word, and usually at the end of the line versus in the middle of the line. A broader meaning, though, would also include words that have the same internal vowel and consonant sounds. So when we talk about a slant rhyme in modern poetry, you would see a lot of different variations of maybe what that would be considered. Slant rhyme became popularized, you know, in the 1800s. Emily Dickinson, she was one of the first people to really utilize that in popular works. And then from there, it became broader and broader and had more and more to do with sound versus anything else. So let's take a closer look. We're going to look at two concepts that are probably the most important to any type of cadence or rhyming of any kind in your work, and that would be consonants and assonants. So consonants is about consonant sounds. So things like P, N, B, V, the consonants in the word. This is about a sound that repeats throughout a group of words, and it would be about a consonant sound that repeats. So I have a couple of examples here. The S at the end of holes in our clothes. We also get a little bit of an L in the middle here, the holes in our clothes. But specifically, this S at the end has the same type of consonant sound. And then in this next line, it becomes a little bit more complex. The P here in dip and the P here in up are both considered types of consonants. And then these L's in fill and until. So to dip, fill up, until, one by one. These are both just small phrases from poems. But when you look at these, you can see that the P and in dip and the P in up both have the same kind of sound. Same thing with fill and until. I had a student in class ask me about one by one. It's the same exact word, so we don't necessarily consider that to be a straightforward form of consonants. This is a little bit too simplistic here, but when we look at these other types, you can hear how it rolls off of the tongue to dip, fill up, until, this sort of cadence with all of these U's and P's and L's and I's and all of this. But right now we're only talking about the consonants, right? So the two P's and the L's here. Again, remember, think sounds, not letters. It doesn't necessarily matter how something is spelled. It actually more so matters how it sounds. And in this sentence, figures traffic would be tough. You have F sounds, this sound, but it comes in a few different forms. You have a single F, a double F, and the GH at the end of tough. And all of this would be considered consonants that you can find in this sentence. And that's specifically because of the way that it sounds. So this is important to remember as you go through this. You'll also notice that they're not side by side. So something like alliteration, for example, which is when the first letter of each word is the same, it doesn't have to be across the board. In other words, they don't have to be consecutive. There can be space in between the words, like here, you know, and they can be spread out. It's, you know, there's not really like 5 words maximum kind of thing, but you can kind of tell when the sounds make an impact and when they don't. It's the closer together, the greater impact, the more spread apart, the less of the impact. They can happen in the beginning, middle, or end in stressed or unstressed syllables. So, you know, stress being which of the part of the word are you stressing the most? Like poem, we're stressing P-O, not E-M. We don't say poem, we say poem, right? So this is the stressed syllable is up front and the unstressed syllable is at the back in the word poem. And so it can happen in either one of those. It can happen with the M or the P, doesn't really make a difference. Assonance. So now we're going to switch over to the other side of this. Assonance is about the vowel sounds. So while consonants is about the consonant sounds inside of the line, this would be about the vowel sounds. So I have a couple of more examples here. We have this 2-line couplet: split, ruined, abandoned walls of chipped blue. So if we were to look at all of the vowel sounds here and how they relate to each other, there is this split and chipped. And if you really, with these vowel sounds, with assonance, if you really sort of like say the word, elongate the syllable, you can figure out whether or not it's any type of assonance there. So split, chipped, you can hear the I sounds that are similar. And as you know, in English, I sounds are not always the same. Sometimes they can be a long E type of sound. And so this is where we get these differences, right? And not necessarily how the word is spelled, but how it is sounded out based on all of the letters that are around that particular vowel. And then we have another one here, ruined and blue. This is probably the most interesting one in this couplet, specifically because we have a UI and a UE, but they both sound the same. So again, we have this coupling of vowels that are not the same in terms of what they are, but how they sound is very similar, and that's what creates the assonance. If you notice, I have not highlighted the A in abandoned and the A in walls. Why is that? It's because they don't sound the same. Aban, wall, they don't sound the same. They take a literal different shape of the mouth, and that can tell you that this is not a case of assonance. So again, not about the actual letter, but about the sound that it makes. Just like with consonants, it doesn't have to be right next to each other, just relatively close. And it can also happen in the beginning, middle, or end in stressed or unstressed syllables. So these things are very common in poetry. They're one of the most widely used devices. Even if you are a blank verse poet, meaning a poet who doesn't rhyme anything, you still may have a lot of assonants and consonants, simply because that is how the language is. English is very partial to cadence, to having a sing-songy sort of cadence because of the vowel sounds. So this is found widely in a lot of different works. So now we're going to switch gears and take a look at a poem. In this rendition of it, I have not underlined anything, but I want you to take some time as I'm reading it and listen for what you think are good examples of assonance and consonants. And then we'll move to the next slide, and there will be some examples that are actually shown by me. I've underlined quite a few examples in the poem. But right now we're going to read the piece together and just sort of see what we hear. So pay attention to what you hear, okay? So it's called Hunger, and the poem is by Donna Massini. Deprived of a kind of salt, I grew to an insatiable craving. I tried to eat rocks. I snapped shut on a terrible hunger. I hid from my mother, her black bras, her spike heels, her curses and weeping. I watched her. I dreamed her dead. Her voice became the noise of my body. I followed the blue veins on the backs of her thighs as she leaned out the window, reeling in the clothes. I was taken by her stories, the yellow pellets she kneaded into margarine sacks, a young girl working it, how it moved in her hands, deepening, undulant. Hunger I tasted in the breeze she left behind. I hid from her in closets that smelled of failure and wings that ate holes in our clothes. Where she kept the dead fox she snapped about her throat, teeth-biting tail, coarse fur, beady eye. I hid from her teased hair and her lipsticks, her shadows and her powders and tears. If I am not careful, I leak black hands. My father's desire falls from my mouth, a frail and ashy carbon, a crease formed in the folds of my arms. I follow strange men, a whistle in my hands, green about my eyes, bending into the night. There is not enough night for me. I want to roll through the roots of ancient oaks, lick salt from the necks of people I love, wake every morning to smell to a human smell, sex in my clothes, something warm and salty in my mouth. Okay, so this is a really interesting piece. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the work itself before we talk about the concepts of assonance and consonants that we're discussing today. And I really just want to point back to some of the other concepts that we've gone over in the last couple of weeks. So there's a lot of really great imagery in this poem. The one that always pops out to me is this description where I hid from her in closets that smelled of failure and wings that ate holes in her clothes. This particular one, where she kept the dead fox she snapped about her throat, teeth-biting tail, coarse fur, beady eye. So this is in reference to an old type of mink a fox stole, where it was an actual fox, sadly, and the teeth actually clasp the fur tail. So she's making this description of a dead animal that was turned into clothing that sits in her mother's closet, right? It always just jumped out at me. It's really great imagery. She has a lot of other really great images here. The things that make her mother, the black bras, the spiked heels, the curses and the weeping, and then leaning out the window, reeling in the clothes, the story, the yellow pellets she kneaded into margarine sacks, which was probably some kind of work that she did as a child, the mother did as a child, but is kind of not, is probably so old now we don't necessarily remember what that is. Some other things, this description of what she wants. I follow strange men, a whistle in my hands, green about my eyes. Green about my eyes must be eyeshadow, right? So really, a lot of really nice images here, things that really kind of set the tone for the poem. And for me, that the images convey that this speaker, who is likely the daughter of the mother in the poem, is admiring her mom, but at the same time afraid of the womanliness of her. Thinking about the varicose veins that are there and all the tools to become a woman. And then at the end, she sort of is this person herself, maybe, because she starts to talk about the green about her eyes and all of this stuff. So to me, that's kind of what the images sort of signal. A lot of great similes and metaphors here. So let's see where we can find a good simile here or metaphor. This, I tried to eat rocks, that is a metaphor. She probably didn't actually try to eat rocks. This is likely a metaphor for something else, but I'm not exactly sure what. And let's see, where else do we see? Her voice became the noise of my body. This is a really nice metaphor for the sort of echo of maybe a mother's voice inside of her daughter's head, the self-critic perhaps, or the person who is chastising when she does something wrong, something along these lines is what I see that. But mostly we see a lot of straightforward stuff. There's this metaphor here, my father's desire falls from my mouth, a frail ashy carbon, a black crease forms in the folds of my arms. I feel like this is cigarette smoke, or I'm sorry, cigarette ash, a frail ashy carbon. But yeah, a lot of really nice similes and metaphors. And juxtaposition, if we had to see a contrast, I think here we might see a large contrast at the end, that, you know, the rest of it being her mother, about her as it relates to her mother, and then mom is gone at the end, and we see the speaker herself at the end here, starting with, if I am not careful, this part all the way through to the end. So really there's a juxtaposition of mother against daughter, the contrast of these two things, and who these two people are. So now that brings us to assonance and consonants. So I hope as we read the piece that you were listening for sounds, because we're going to go to the next slide and we're actually going to point some out. So the first ones that come to mind are these two, deprived of a kind. You, like I said, you can really hear the vowel sound if you stretch it out. I am more partial to the vowel sounds, and therefore they're easier for me to pick out. Actually, when I was doing this class with the students who were in the Zoom class last week, they picked out some that I hadn't noticed, and a lot of them were the ones that were based on consonants, because that is just something that eludes my ears a little more than assonance. So you will probably pick ones out that I don't have underlined. Insatiable craving, the terrible hunger, I didn't underline that, but one of my students pointed that out. Tried, terrible hunger, that's all consonants. The R sound, and even hunger and mother, that's another one. We don't consider like the first letter usually. I mean, black bras is more along the lines of alliteration. I had a student point that out, but it's more along the lines of alliteration, where you start the word with the same vowel sound or consonant sound. So I'm paying more attention to the internals, like her curses, those R sounds, her curses, and even the E in there, her curses. It's so weird how an E and a U can create the same vowel sound, but that's English. And what else do we have here? Voice and noise is another one that I picked out. The voice, noise, boy, noise, and even the C and S. Leaned and reeling, they both have that long E sound. Yellow pellets, that's probably the most easily identifiable one. Let's see, girl and working, that the were, they both have the IR and the OR sounds are similar in there. Deepening, breeze, these two are linked together, and then undulant and hunger are linked together. Holes in our clothes, you may remember that from our earlier slide. Kept and dead, you can hear those long E sounds. Teeth and beady, you can hear those long E sounds. And teased as well belongs in that trio. Shadows and powders, the OWs. Leak and black, that hard K sound. Father and arms, those are linked together. And even the RMS in forms and arms are linked together. Men and green and bending, all three of those go together. And then eyes and night down here as well. Roll and oaks, that's similar as well. Through and roots is one that was picked out by one of my students that I did not notice. Lick and neck are two that I did not notice as well initially, but then I went back through and looked at it. The R's in morning and warm. So you can really hear how this kind of like does a whole thing for this poem. The poem really is a nice sounding work. And truthfully, it creates a flow to the piece that helps you move through it and kind of grasp the movement of the work. Maybe like the growing of the child through the process or something along those lines. So we can use this in our own work, but let's try to do an exercise. So we're gonna do an exercise here that is all about assonance and consonants. So assonance and consonants are going to be something that we work on with soundscapes. That's what this exercise is called. I have two words here, rush and power, and both can be utilized in this exercise. You're gonna choose one or the other to create 2 lines of poetry that contain assonance or consonants. So why don't you go ahead and take a second to go up to use one of these 2 words. You wanna just try to work on creating sounds that are similar. We are not going for direct rhymes. So rush and hush, those are direct rhymes. What we really wanna do is take the U or the R or the SH sound from the word and try to associate a little bit of cadence to that, okay? So why don't you guys take a few minutes, about 10 minutes, and see if you can write a little couplet that has some assonance and consonants related to either the word rush or the word power. So you're gonna utilize one of these 2 words, okay? Go ahead, pause the video, and come back to me when you're ready. All right, so I hope that that exercise really showed you how to create that. And if it didn't, I recommend that you go back to the previous slide, look at Donna Massini's Hunger, and try to find a vowel sound that's similar maybe to the ones in rush or the ones in power, or the consonant sounds in rush or power, and see if there's a word that you can't link together from that poem. Just pluck a word and see if you can create a couplet. And then it'll become a little bit easier. Once your ears get sensitive to the tonalities of assonance and consonants, you'll find it a lot simpler to write based on them, okay? So usually this is the part in the class where we have our workshop, and like I said, that does not take place in the videos. If you'd like to take part in our final workshop, it will be this coming Thursday, May the 7th, and it will be at 8 p.m. You can find the event on our Facebook page, and you can also find the Zoom link in the discussion for that. So if you're interested in joining me in real time, you can do that. But for now, I'm gonna go ahead and leave you with the prompt. So this weekly prompt has to do with assonance and consonants, like I said. Take the 2 lines you wrote in class today and create a poem of at least 8 lines that contains at least 4 instances of assonance and or consonants. So you're really counting this. And I really wanna say one last thing here, that it may seem like assonance and consonants happens by accident, but it absolutely does not. Poets choose their words very wisely, and they try to let's say this, they try to say as much as they can in as few words as possible. So that also means incorporating things like sound in order to create, convey, or what have you, to the reader that what they are saying. So it's really important that you consider this a technique that you can work on versus something that just happens in a piece of poetry. It doesn't just happen. Everything in a poem is crafted by the author. So consider that. Spend some time thinking about sound this week. Think about sound. Think about how your favorite musicians use it in their lyrics. You know, you have heard it before. So that's pretty much it for our assonance and consonants lesson. So if you'd like to join us, like I said, this coming Thursday, May the 7th is our final class, and it will be on line breaks. We'll talk about why they're important and how you can use them to impact rhythm and sound and mood and all kinds of things. So join us if you can. If not, the final class video will be released next week, and you'll be able to watch that just like you watched this one. So thank you guys very much for participating. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the screen share so that I can say goodbye. Thanks again, and I hope that you will go back and reuse these videos whenever you need a brush up, or if you'd like to use one of the exercises. Thank y'all again, and take care. Bye.